worship and the words that are coming through are very much from the same theme of, that He's at work, hey, and He's looking for people to that surrender and that submission, and He's not a harsh God, but He is a God who calls us forward, calls us into adventure, and actually, this is we're up to in Paul. You know, we're tracking through Acts, and we're up to last part of Acts 25 and moving into Acts 26, and actually, it's very much the theme of this passage. Paul, who's in prison, seemingly in prison, and is about to make his third defence of his for his life, basically, and for his. For who he is and what he said and done in Jerusalem and around when he arrived back there. And so he was called, an apostle literally means to be sent, and we are all sent. And if there's one thing that I want you to take away is that actually God, he's a God of action, he's a God of movement, and he's drawing you onwards, and not to just sit, but to move into action, to be a servant and be a witness to his name, to build his kingdom. And just in a simple way, a small way, like the youth on Saturday, we painted the fence, and actually the number of youth were like, oh, well, this is really awesome. It is, I'm loving doing this. We even had a guy who came along, a friend of a friend who has never been to youth group, and he's like, started asking about church, started asking like, how does it all work? And he's like, man, if you do another one of these painting things, I'd like to come along. I'd just like to be involved, and so there's a part of this sense of movement that he's calling us to build his kingdom. He's not calling us to sit down on our knees and sort of and relax. And so there's an excitement, there's an adventure to it. And so Paul now is sort of he's going to give this is the third time he shares kind of his testimony of his journey of faith. And so I want you to set the scene. Paul, he's been left in by Felix, who was the last governor, in jail he's been sitting there for 2 years. Festus was commissioned to be the next governor, and in his estimation, he's innocent. He actually states it twice, and he'll state it the third time at the end of this chapter. But he's like, what do I do with this guy, And he doesn't know really what to make of Paul. But this opportunity appears with the arrival of King Agrippa and Bernice. They actually were the grandson of Herod the Great. This is the guy who was around when Jesus was born and who had all the children executed in Bethlehem. He was quite a madman. That was his granddad. His dad was King Agrippa the First. He was the one who had James executed, and so King Agrippa is married to his sister Bernice. So yeah, lovely family, hey, lovely heritage. And this is the guy who now Paul is being called to stand in front of and give his testimony. And but what also about King Agrippa and Bernice, they were known to have a really in-depth understanding of Jewish culture and history, as well as Roman law. So Festus is like, you guys might be able to help me out here. And so we join the story in Acts 25 here, verse 22. So the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp and entered the audience room with the high-ranking military officers and the prominent men of the city. At the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. Festus said, King Agrippa, and all who are present with us, you see this man. The whole Jewish community has petitioned me about him in Jerusalem and here in Caesarea, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. I found he had done nothing deserving of death because he had made his appeal, but because he had made his appeal to the emperor, I decided to send him to Rome. But I have nothing definite to write to his majesty about him. Therefore I've brought him before you all, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that as a result of this investigation, I may have something to write. For I think it unreasonable to send a prisoner onto Rome without specifying the charges against him. So imagine the scene. So these King Agrippa's coming into the jurisdiction of Festus, and so he comes with his full ceremonial and regal sort of setup. He would have had his royal robes on him. He would have had a gold crown on his head. They were ushered into the court with an entourage of all the influential Jewish people in his area. Festus, marking the occasion, would also have been fully set up in his regalia as well. They believe something like this: the captains of the 5 cohorts of the Roman army that were stationed in Caesarea, they believe there's 5,000 troops there. And so the heads of those troops would have all been present in their in their sort of official ceremonial uniforms and with the big helmets and the whole works. And so it was like incredibly grand moment. And then in shuffles Paul, the tent maker, in chains, wearing who knows what, in front of all these people. It's like there's not a sort of a greater sort of grander sort of moment in Acts, really, than this moment here. And so they're all waiting for Paul. And they probably think they're in charge. But actually, you'll see that, man, like Paul, who's just utterly fearless, like he just comes in and starts his speech and has the room. And something about who he is, that he is so submitted to God now. His life and his mind is forfeit. They can't do anything to him. His sole aim and purpose is to spread the gospel. And so you're going to hear again, this is Paul's response to this opportunity of speaking in front of these guys. Then King Agrippa said to Paul, "You have permission to speak for yourself." And it's almost like, oh, please hang yourself, because I need some evidence. Because actually, when you think what Festus actually said there before wasn't entirely true. He knew what the charges were, but the problem was he's innocent, so he can't send Paul off to Caesar, like it's like the Supreme Court, in the whole of the Roman Empire, with no documentation. So he needs something, and so Paul mentioned with his hand, and he began his defense. Verse 2, King Agrippa, I consider myself fortunate to stand before you today as I make my defense against all the accusations of the Jews, and especially so because you are well acquainted with all the Jewish customs and controversies. Therefore I beg you to listen to me patiently. The Jewish people all know the way I have lived ever since I was a child, from the beginning of my life in my own country and also in Jerusalem. They have known me for a long time and can testify, if they are willing, that I conform to the strictest sect of our religion, living as a Pharisee. And now it is because of my hope in what God has promised our ancestors that I am on trial today. This is the promise of our 12 tribes are hoping to see fulfilled as they earnestly serve God day and night. King Agrippa, it is because of this hope that these Jews are accusing me. Why should any of you consider it incredible that God raises the dead? I too was convinced that I ought to do all that was possible to oppose the name of Jesus of Nazareth. And that is just what I did in Jerusalem. On the authority of the chief priests, I put many of the Lord's people in prison. And when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. Many a time I went from one synagogue to another to have them punished, and I tried to force them to blaspheme. I was so obsessed with persecuting them that I even hunted it down in foreign cities. Well, so he starts off with his backstory. And, like Paul's not trying to gain favour, but he's trying to speak the truth. And I think that's one of the great characteristics of the New Testament, that so many of the characters were willing to be honest about who they were, that they had a bit of a colourful history and backstory. But he was transformed, he was changed. And those words this morning came out as actually that don't let your backstory and let the ankle bracelet take you out from your future. Paul's saying, like he said there that I oversaw the deaths of multiple Christians, and he approved. And yet God sought him out, God called him. And there's a famous preacher and evangelist, his name was Brownlow North. He lived in the 1800s, and he too was a changed man. And how about this for a story? Early in his preaching career, he was about to speak at a church in Aberdeen, Scotland, right? And as he came walking up the aisle to preach, someone pushed a letter into his hand. And so he takes this letter and he opens it up. And in this letter is this testimony of a whole history of sordid activity that he was involved in. And he's like, and at the bottom it's basically like, if you go up and preach today, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to testify what you did in your past. So don't you dare get up on the stage. And he's standing there halfway the altar, to look at reading this letter. And so he folds that up. He walks up to the pulpit, opens the letter back up, and reads the whole thing out in front of everyone. And he said, do you know what? It's totally true. That was me. I did it. But I'm a changed man. And by the grace of God, he has transformed my life. And we have story after story of that, where God takes those ankle bracelets off and he tears them away and he transforms people's lives. And just as that awesome picture of the aurora, it's a sovereign work of God. It's not something that we can manufacture, that we can just make it happen. It's not about doing more and working harder. And Paul here, his testimony is like, man, I was more religious and more passionate than all of you, but I completely missed it. I completely missed the Jesus and who he stood for and what he was. I thought I was doing the right thing, and yet I was actually working completely against him. And so I want to encourage you to don't stop sharing your testimony. This is like the third time now, Luke, right, in the same book, that he's writing Paul's testimony to that he's sharing for the third time to a different audience, but the same readers, and so it's almost like Luke saying, just as Paul has not pulled back from sharing his story, neither should we, and actually your story has power. Your story can transform lives. It's a testimony of what God's done in your life. And it may be small, it may be large, but it's still a testimony of that aurora, that God's sovereign work, that he's fighting for you and I in the heavenlies, and transforming our lives. And so Paul's whole message really is around this actually, he starts with this expectation. He points to the fact that the Jewish people had this book, this incredible, the Old Testament as we know it, and these writings. And in it, there was sort of peppered throughout was these promises that someday that God would resurrect the dead, that he would overcome death itself. And so Isaiah 26:19, here's a little example. He said, "But your dead will live, Lord. Their bodies will rise. Let those who dwell in the dust wake up and shout for joy. Your dew is like the dew of the morning, for the earth will give birth to her dead." And the most obvious is Daniel 12. Second half of there, it says, "But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. And so the Jewish people and the religious leaders had this expectation that actually that God was going to do something sovereign, that he was going to one day resurrect the dead. They didn't have a full understanding of what that looked like, but that was a promise. And so Paul, just in the start of this dialogue, he sort of like does a bit of a mic drop. And in verse 8 there, he said, "So why shouldn't any of you consider it incredible that God raises the dead?" And so he's sort of going, as a prelude really, he wasn't asking them for a conversation, but he was kind of prompting them to think, okay, King Agrippa, you know the Jewish history, you know the scriptures. There is an expectation that God is going to one day raise the dead. And so why wouldn't and why couldn't a sovereign God do that? And so the question, that's sort of it's an awesome segue into Jesus. I don't know about you, but when I read that, it kind of jarred me. It kind of like, whoa, that's kind of a pretty out there statement to make, And it's funny, like we, in our safe sort of New Zealand world, we don't often think about the life after death. We don't think about the hope that there is the resurrection of the dead. That actually, and as you get older and as you live longer and friends and family pass away, suddenly it becomes way more real to you. I was even reading in history, and they were saying, we live in an unprecedented age where the catchphrase probably 200 years ago was the norm was war, then peace broke out. In the 1700s, they said in a whole 100 years, there were 7 years where there was not war in Europe. So we sort of, sometimes we forget about the promise that we have, that's in the Word, that one day we're going to be alive again, that we're going to be, these frail bodies that are getting old, that ache and are sore, that we're going to pass from those into glory. And we're going to one day stand before God, and He's going to weigh us up, and it comes down to, as Paul was saying, it's actually, do you have faith in Jesus? Do you accept what He's done? And Paul here drops this in when this is his story, and he's like, man, that was not me. I was one of the ones fighting it. He couldn't see that Jesus was the Messiah, and he thought, man, what Jesus and his followers were standing for was offensive to him. He thought they were blaspheming, and he was fighting it with everything he had, every passion and everything in him. He was fighting against God and what he had done. We left him in 17, and he was saying that even I went to other cities to find these Christians. And so verse 8, that was 11. So verse 12, on one of these journeys I'm going to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priests. At noon, King Agrippa, I was on the road. I saw a light from heaven. I just want to pause there. At noon. I don't know if you've been to Israel, but I have. But man, nobody walks around on a journey at noon and is like 40-degree heat, sort of in a semi-arid desert. Like you travel in the morning, you travel at night. But Paul said they would have read that and gone, man, this guy is driven. Like he is walking in 40-degree heat, for 40, 50 Ks to find and hunt out and rat out these Christians. That is how driven he was. So at about noon, King Agrippa, I was on the road and I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, blazing around me and my companions. We all fell to the ground, and I heard a voice saying to me in Aramaic, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. And then I asked, well, who are you, Lord? I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting, the Lord replied. Now get up and stand on your feet. I have appeared to you to appoint you as a servant and as a witness for what you have seen and will see of me. I will rescue you from your own people and from the Gentiles. I am sending you to them to open their eyes and turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, so that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. Like, what a commissioning. Like, this transformation that's starting to happen in Paul's heart. And when I read that, I was like, my goodness, what? This random statement, it's like, it is hard for me to kick against the goads. I was like, what is that all about? And it's interesting that that Jesus said that without even revealing who he was. He's like, he just says, Saul, why you persecuted me? It's hard for you to kick against the goads. And it's actually an agricultural saying, a term. And what happened was with a young ox, and I don't know if you know oxen, but man, they are big, strong sort of beasts. They use them for ploughing and doing, they're like the Massey Fergusons, in the old days. They did all the heavy work, much more so than horses and things like that. And so a young ox, right, is really strong. And so when they put a yoke on them, they put the yoke around their neck and the straps. It said that they would buck and they would hunch their back and they would kick out. And so as a way of teaching them submission, they put like this bar behind them, a wooden bar with wooden spikes on it. So you can imagine when they kicked, it was like smack, and they hit their back feet against these wooden spikes, and man, it would have hurt. Like, they would have been like, oh, ow, And so they learned submission by their own, fighting the system. And so here's Jesus, like, just picture Paul. Like, he is on this mission to root out these Christians. And the first thing that Jesus said to him was like, yeah, it's hard for you, Paul, to kick against the goads. Like, he's like, yeah, actually, Paul, sort it out. Like, I am sovereign, and what I'm doing, and this is my plan. This is how I'm revealing myself to humanity. And the more you kick, the harder it's going to get. Actually, you just need to submit to my plan and purposes, and get on the same picture. And so there's this, and so like, what a picture of Paul. Like, as a young kind of rebel, as sort of thinking that he's doing good for the world, and yet he's doing the complete opposite. And I thought, man, that's such a picture of us. Like, if you want to be effective, if you want to serve, and you want to walk out God's purposes in your life, you know what? You've got submission is step one. It's a laying down of our opinions and our thoughts about how things should be. And it's like, no, I'm sovereign, Paul. Like, this is how it is. You just need to start pulling in line with where I'm going. Jordan Peterson, Greg was just sort of processing this week, and Greg was saying actually he had this amazing quote, a little video he did, and he said, man, if you want your life to change, he said, all you have to do is stop lying. It's like, if you start to take responsibility for your actions and stop blaming other people, stop deflecting, but start getting really honest with yourself, your life will change. Your life will transform. And then his statement after that was, well, man, it really hit me. It was like, who do you think you are that you can bend reality to your viewpoint? I thought, wow, I've never thought about it in that way. Often, so when we lie or when we deflect, we're saying, no, this is the way it is. This is my version of reality. I don't need to be doing the washing up because such and such, this and that, and all my defences and all my arguments, or what we do, and it's like, actually no, it's like, who are we to bend reality to our perception? And so Jordan Peterson, it's like, yes, so if you want your life to change, it's like, stop lying to yourself. And I guess that's in a essence what, submit to truth with a capital T, the person who is truth. And for Paul, that was the challenge. It was like, Paul, stop kicking against reality, kicking against what I'm doing. And you just need to start submitting. And so I guess part of that, so God has a plan and purpose for us. And He's looking for people to partner with Him. But he wants us to submit. And it comes from our heart. It comes from a surrendering. And just as those words coming out this morning, it's like, actually He can be so direct with things, and it cuts through all our opinions and our presuppositions and cuts to our hearts. But the question is like, will you surrender yourself? Will you surrender this area of my life? Will you give it up and just give it to me? And when we do that, then transformation happens. And that's how Paul, he sums it up. Or actually, Jesus, in the commissioning that was coming, in verse 16, he's like, Paul, stand up. Like, actually, that's your past, but I have got a plan for your future. I need you to get up now, and I need you to start. I've got a purpose for you. I am calling to be a witness and of who I am to the people around you. And so that's what he asked them to do. And that witness here included, it talks about this, that you will see people be transformed. They'll come from darkness into light. It's like, and again, it's this picture of when we stop being focused and looking at ourselves, we begin to look up. We see heaven. We see people who we can love because He loved them first. We see a God whom we can serve and worship. We see, we carry a message that brings transformation, that brings a call for people to repent and to change, and to come into a relationship with God. And just as Paul had done all this stuff and he was so dedicated, and yet the transformation came when he heard from God. He heard His voice. He began to walk in submission to Him. And it's in that was when he became fruitful. So it's submission, a calling, and through those things we become fruitful. It's really simple. and all that looked like was sharing his story. He just continued to share the good news and shared his story. He didn't hold back. And so, it can be in small and large situations. We had an opportunity just a couple of weeks ago last week, I took a number of the youth to a camp down at Hibbert Park with Avonhead Baptist youth. And there we were just doing some exercises about hearing God's voice with these youth, and I was in a group of 4 of them, and it was getting a little bit, sort of noisy, and people were getting a bit unfocused and having a bit of fun, but I had this word for one of the girls in the group, and I thought, do I give it, and I'm not sure if it's gonna. As the moment passed, but I thought, actually, you know what? I've just been told to declare the good news, and so I said to her, hey, do you know what? We're doing these. The question was, what colour? We're doing this exercise where it's like we ask the Lord, what colour do you see that person as, and why is that significant? And I got gold, and I just said to her, look, I got gold, and it might sound cheesy, but look, I feel like the Lord just wants you to know you are so precious to Him. He does see you as gold, that your heart is like gold. And but not only that it's soft. Gold's a soft metal. It can be easily impressed. And it's like He wants to impress His character and His love on you, on your heart. And it was just a real simple, little picture. And I didn't think much of it in the moment. and at the end of the night, we did encourage the youth. He said, hey, look, if someone has given you something, go back and tell them, but let them know, because it's real encouragement that people know that what you've said is useful. And lo and behold, this girl comes over, never met her, never seen her, she comes back over to me and says, look, I just want you to let you know that word was really powerful. It meant a lot to me. And she had tears in her eyes and didn't explain what the significance was, but for her, it was really, it meant a lot. And maybe you've read this passage today and you thought, you know what, Paul, it doesn't seem like a hugely moving speech that you've made. I'm not feeling it. But you see, in the room, in front of all the entourage, it wasn't Paul on his own. He had the Holy Spirit with him. And the Holy Spirit's working through his words, no matter how simple they are, no matter how simplistic it is. And he's sharing like 30 years of history of his life, summing it up. He might have been thinking, man, this doesn't seem to be effective. But all God asked him to do is, says, I will send you to the nations, and you're going to herald and be a witness for me. And so that is as simple as that. So if you want to step out and you want to be a witness and a herald for him and to get into the game more, I just encourage you. We're in a season, I believe God is really working. And the words that coming up today is like, sometimes we sit in our seats and we're thinking, oh Lord, when everything's I've got all my ducks lined up and my life looks like this polished, beautiful stainless steel bench. I know what that looks like because we got some installed in the kitchen and they glisten. There's not like a scratch on them, and it's just like, you just look at it and think, that's amazing, But actually, that's not what he's waiting for. Like, God called Paul. Like, in this, man, was his life a mess at that time? And, seemingly working against God completely, missing the point. But he called him into a life of purpose, a life of mission, a life of heralding his message. And doesn't matter. He was a tent maker. You could be working in a supermarket, you could be building, you could be studying, you could be at school, you could be retired. It doesn't matter. Actually, the offer is to come in and to be an ambassador, an apostle, a sent one from him. Paul started off being sent by the Sanhedrin, as it were. He was a sent one on their behalf. And midway through this Damascus road at 12 o'clock for midday, he gets this new commission that, no, Paul, you're going to be sent by me. And the opportunity is this morning, I believe. The invitation is, do you want to be sent by me this morning? And as we wrap up, as a team, if you want to come and would be great to sing one more song to finish. But I just want to encourage you this morning, if you're here and you're thinking, man, I don't know what my life's about. I feel like I've got things that are holding me back. In my perception, I've got these, ankle bracelets on. I've got a past. The Lord wants to break that this morning. He wants to break that perception over your life. The fear of stepping out, the fear of going forward, the fear of just being vulnerable with people, and being vulnerable with Him. He is for you, so I really encourage you, if those words that came through this morning, the aurora that God's fighting for you, that in the heavenlies that He's battling, that He can bring a breakthrough, a transformation. He can take you from Saul to Paul with one word, with one sentence, if you're willing to go there. And so if you'd like to respond this morning, we'd love to pray for you. I love the way there's kairos moments and there's two words in the Greek. Chronos means general time. It means it's just what is the time. But there are kairos means the now time. And so I encourage you in life, there are appointments. Just as there was an appointment for Paul, this morning is an appointment for you. It's like God is inviting you personally to deal with stuff, to set you free, to set you on a road, to whatever it is, to equip you for that new journey, that new season. So I encourage you, if it's a now time for you, then do respond. We'd like to pray for healing as well. We've been seeing lots of healings and breakthroughs in that area as well. So do pray. Feel free to come forward. We'd love to pray. Yeah, have a great day. Bless you heaps. And feel free to stay for a cuppa. I'm not sure. I don't think the coffee machine's on today, but you're very welcome to stay around. We'd love to chat. With some cheap coffee, yeah.